Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar. We're excited to present to you our sixth webinar series, Building Strength, Inspiring Hope, a plan for shifting cultural competency in practice, as part of our bringing communities together around brain health and aging, hosted by the Social Planning Council of Ottawa. My name is Sybil Braganza, and I'm the coordinator of the Ethnocultural Seniors Program at the Social Planning Council of Ottawa. Before we begin, I would like to thank our funders, Centre for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, Ontario Trillium Foundation, and the New Horizons for Seniors program. Today's webinar, Shifting Understanding of Cultural Competency in Service Provision, will explore the role of the service provider in building culturally inclusive environments and share a number of tools, resources, and interventions and strategies. We will look at how intersectionality combines to create both discrimination and privilege, and discuss what each one of us can do to be an advocate, ally, and accomplice. The agenda for today will start off by our keynote speaker, Dr. Linda Cognitiman. Just a few housekeeping rules. Please use your mute button. I'm sure you've already done that. If you have any questions for our speaker, please use the Q&A chat and the chat box, and we will take all your questions at the end of the sessions. So going forward, all our webinars will be recorded and posted on our website, which is Ottawa Community Partnership for Health Equity. And associated resources will also be posted there. The last webinar will be held on October the 13th, again at the same time from 10 to 11:30 a.m. Please register for them on Eventbrite. Thank you for attending once again and welcome. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Linda Cognitiman. Dr. Linda Cognitiman is a provincial manager in addictions and mental health. She holds a PhD in social work and is an instructor at the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary. Linda played a vital role in the development of Canada's national standards of cultural and linguistic competency. She has written extensively on the subject of cultural competency in healthcare, presented on the topics worldwide, and is a much sought after clinical consultant. Please welcome me in joining Linda. Thank you.
Thanks, Sybil. I'm very grateful to be part of this. I'm grateful because, when someone invites you to their party, you need to adjust and adapt to what they have to offer. And it has been incredible working with Sybil to develop this and to come up with a title, a theme that would capture what's happening currently, at the same time drawing people in so that we can have a conversation. When we're unable to have conversation, that's when we know that we have some difficulties. So when we work with people, we need to be able to shift. We need to be able to plan. We need to be able to be strategic. And that's why this conversation is happening. As I mentioned before, Sybil and I have a really good working relationship. We started out as very young social workers 20 years ago or more in Calgary, and partnering to address issues of oppression in our city. Now we both live in different cities, but at the same time, we continue to work together. So thank you, Sybil, for having me, and thank you as well for your organization to put your trust and faith in me. One of the things that might become almost mundane or we do without thought behind it is really honoring traditional territory. And because we're talking about shifting and thinking about anti-oppression and cultural competency, I really would like you to take time right now. We're going to take about a minute and focus on how you honor your traditional territory. So this is the one I have up because I'm in Calgary. This is what I use. And then the next one is really focused on Ottawa. And I know people are centered at different location, centered all across the country. And some people are joining from outside of the country as well. But I really wanted to us to take a minute and really think about what it means to honor traditional territory. So for me as a black woman, it means that um, I am on a land that's providing me amazing opportunities. The fact that I was able to complete my master's in social work, the fact that I was able to have children on this land, the fact that I was able to have my PhD, the fact that I have a job, the fact that I can eat. It's all thanks to the opportunities that were provided to me of being part of this country. And so what I do with it is very important. The way I handle it, the way I look to other people, the way I honor this country, the way I look at indigenous people who have taken care of this land for from generation to generation, and I can take part of their land. That's what it means to me when I say I am honoring traditional territory. There's so much that has been sacrificed for me to be able to come and live here. And so when we think about land acknowledgement for each of us, it will mean something different. So thank you to those of you who highlighted on the chat box what it means to you, living in harmony, loving all people, honoring and respecting people's the land, the culture, the language, and the history, and being able to be honest to yourself and help other younger individuals or people who are moving into the country to understand what it means to live in Canada and to know that this land belonged to indigenous people before we came here, and it will always remain the same. So we need to really embody that, and I know there's a lot of discussions about it. That's not why we're here. But I really, the focus for me in terms of talking about honoring traditional territory is really focused on what does it mean to you individually. It doesn't, it's not about what does your organization say about it. Yes, it is important to know that, but honestly when it comes down to it, you are the one who will have to speak to it from time to time. So, as you know, we started last week. So, the overall objectives was really to look at understanding the importance of why diversity exist in the workplace and what to do about it and how to value it. To enhance inclusion of cultural competent practice in service provision, but also to look at our attitudes, knowledge, skills, and how all of this impact racialized communities. Specifically for today, we really would like to look at a couple of case studies, as a group, talk about what type of tools and resources do you have that you can share. And the one of the things I want to do is easy for the speaker to come and say, oh, use this assessment tool, use this book. This is a video that you could use, but that really doesn't create a community of supporters. I really would like us to start thinking about ourselves as people everywhere that can support each other. And so, one of the things is today, I really would like us to bring in what you're using and other people could use as well, looking at our biases, our intersectionality, what it means, um, particular interventions and strategies that works for you, and looking at evidence-based practice. But we will have a conversation too about oppression and equity, because you can't talk about those things, you can't talk about cultural competency without getting to those things. So, shifting understanding of cultural competency in service provision, you need to be able to do it by highlighting several things. And so, in saying that, we started last week by looking at an racialized communities in Canada. What is impacting their health? We looked at impact of immigration on a personal, professional, and institutional level. And then we spent a lot of time talking about racism as a determinant of health and how it impacts individuals, communities, and families. And we just did a couple of slides on cultural competency. As you remember, we highlighted that 50% of your life um, um, is 50% is impacted, your health impacted by 50% of these things: your income, your early childhood development, disability, ability, social exclusion, inclusion, social safety net, gender, employment, race, indigenous status, safe nutrition and food, housing, homelessness, and community belonging. Genetics plays a role as well. If all of the 50% is going well, your genetics can impact you, but there's something that could be done with it because you have access to healthcare. That's 25%. You should have access to healthcare. And then your environment impacts you as well. This is what makes us as Canadians. If these things are not in place, um, things go sour. And I even used an example of a young boy that comes from a study in Canada just to highlight how this impacts you. We spoke about the impact that racism has as a determinant of health, and it's by a study from Paradis et al., where they talk about a protocol for conducting a systemic review and meta-analysis. And this visual really shows that when you have experienced racial discrimination, if it's physical, psychological, or if it's because of denial of goods, it has impact on you, on your mental health, it has impact on your physical health. So if you missed last week, I'm hoping you could listen to the recording so that you could just join the two together. So today we really want to move from the sensitivity component to a more culturally competent, anti-oppressive environment and conversation. And like I said before, this is a journey. It isn't going to happen overnight, but this needs to be an intentional, reflexive journey. It requires all of us to use strategy to focus on the needs of individuals, to focus on the needs of families, to focus on advocacy, to focus on community engagement on a variety of levels. It's not just with you, it's the institutions we work in. That's where we need to really focus on how do we make changes, address changes. And so just remember, it's not expected of you after today to jump up and know exactly what to do. It's a journey. Um, I've heard people say, well, no one can really be culturally competent. No one can be competent. Well, I beg to differ. The reason I feel like this is a great opportunity is because um, anti-oppressive practice, anti-racist practice is something that we grow into. We get better at it the more we do it. We see it both as a concept, but we need to start thinking of it as understanding how it can make changes in your work environment and how your workplace dynamic can change in such a way that people can walk in or experience the services in a completely different way. When we talk about cultural competency in an anti-oppressive environment, it's also about the awareness that there is something wrong. There's something happening that is impacting people. It's impacting staff. It's impacting people that are walking into the doors. It's impacting communities. And people can't move. They can't grow. They can't breathe because they're being impacted by systems, by individuals in a way that cripples them and keep them paralyzed. So the way that services, when we know something's wrong, is when services are status quo, when nothing's moving. And if you at any point of your career have had situations where you see something's not going well, you are on your path to either be becoming aware of what it means to function in an anti-oppressive environment or in a cultural competent environment. So I'm going to ask for support now for the polling questions. Again, I'll hand it over to Mylene. And please select the answer that best represents you. And I can see some, I'm not quite sure if we're done with this, but I can see some comments that I want to highlight as well. Thank you so much for one of the participants who identified that they are white and have experienced discrimination based on language. And that's going to lead us into our next reflection. Thank you. So 31% of individuals have identified that they are racialized and have experienced oppression and racism. And 36% have identified they're not racialized and have experienced oppression and racism. 33% I highlighted that they have never experienced oppression, racism, or discrimination. So we're going to come back to this at some point, but I'm just going to continue with the presentation based on where we're at. So my next reflection is about uh, what are some ways you might have experienced oppression and how has this impacted you? And please feel free to use the chat box to identify. I did read one person's response already, that they have been they've experienced discrimination based on language, and it's good to keep the terminology the right way. So thank you so much. Someone else says they have experienced discrimination as a woman as well and as a lesbian. Thank you for sharing this. What are some ways you might have experienced oppression? The reason it is important to highlight your own experiences, it can be difficult to support someone and listen to someone if you haven't had those experiences. Now, you can support, don't get me wrong, but when you have been oppressed, when you have had experiences of oppression, um, it- looking at other people, looking at communities as a whole who go through it on a day by day basis, it changes things in terms of how you support, how you listen, how you position yourself, and how you become an accomplice or an ally of people. Someone on this has identified that the assumption of their abilities or lack thereof based on how they look, and the experiences of discrimination as a woman, as a French language speaker, as a younger person in the workplace, and oppression by race and religion. Thank you so much for sharing. It really will help as we continue our conversation this morning, as I think it's going to provide us with an enhanced opportunities to understand other people that are being oppressed, even if you're not going through the same type of oppression. So I want to start by looking at some of the language we're using, for example, oppression, so that we understand what it is. Because at any given moment, each of us can become the oppressor or the oppressed, the person going through oppression. It can switch so quickly. So, oppression is the act of one social group using power or privilege for its own benefit while disempowering, marginalizing, silencing, and subordinating another group. Oppression occurs both systematically within societies and institutions. It happens individually as well between two interacting people. The other piece that I would like to draw your attention on is when we do this work, there's always the conversation about what is inequality and equality, justice and equity. And so it's really good to think about what does it mean for you when there is inequality. And the visual might be a bit blurry, but when you have the PowerPoint, you'll get an opportunity to look at it in detail. Because on the first picture, the individual on one side all the fruits hanging from that side and not from the other side. So it's really hard. You can see the inequality as that individual, the fruits dropping and not for the other one. With equality, same picture, but then both people have equal access to having a ladder that's the same height that gets them to the tree. However, there's no low hanging fruits for the one individual on the right. With equity, one ladder is higher. With justice, more situations. With justice, you see that the tree is filled on both sides. So there's different ways of looking at equity, equality, inequality, and justice. The one other word that I would bring in is just the fact that when all these barriers exist, it would be great to just bring liberation so that that's the ultimate goal, not to have these barriers where we need to think about the reality, the inequality and the equality and the equity. We need to think about how do we dismantle these things so that people don't have these barriers to get where they need to be. So that's how I would like to set the stage too. We're just gonna pause for a sec. I'm gonna take a sip of water. But one of the things that I want to highlight is I use quotes a lot in my work. When I use it in terms or in tandem of our roles as individuals, as people who work with others. So when we think about a garden and we think about flowers, I need to think about that concept. I grew up in a family where my parents absolutely loved flowers. And my mom loved gardening to the day she passed away this year. But when I think about her and I think about her grooming her garden, I think about this quote: when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. So when you think about reality, inequality, equality, equity, and we need to think about environments where we're not changing people, we're not trying to change communities, we're trying to change the situation that people are living, the conditions that people are. And so that's why when I look at how oppression and racism impact people, I look at it as a determinant of health, as something that needs to be addressed that way instead of trying to fix the people we work with. This brings us to a bigger conversation in terms of intersectionality. And I know as part of your training with Sybil, someone addressed it somehow as well. And um, so I want to touch on it. I want to touch on it because I also would like you to start thinking about how your intersectionality impacts you. And we will watch two short videos to bring that conversation to life, have a conversation about it as well. So intersectionality is the intersection between gender, race, and other categories of differences in individuals' lives, social practices, institutional arrangement, and cultural ideology, and the outcomes of these interactions in terms of power. It's a mouthful. We're gonna deconstruct that in just a little bit. So I want you to think about certain terms is the interaction between and the differences in individuals' life, cultural ideology. It's the outcome of these terms. So I'm just going to switch quickly to a video that I would like us to watch. We're going to start with this. And this one really just highlights how children think about this concept. And kids have a way of thinking about things in a particular way. Just bear with me. Getting there. Kids have a way of thinking about things in a particular way. And when they do, okay, let's just go here. We're just going to go right into it.
That means yeah. So intersectionality is a concept that allows us to realize that people live like multidimensional lives. So for example, if someone is a Black woman and they're Black and they're also a woman, it's important to look at the possibility that they may experience sexism as well as racism at the same time.
So are you saying that, like, say sexism is not experienced by, like, everyone in the same way?
Exactly.
Thinking about and being conscious of the fact that we have a bunch of different things that make up our identity. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that kind of makes sense because I'm light skinned, people think that I'm white, but I'm First Nations. Intersectionality also is like a big puzzle from your toes to your head, tip top of your head. I don't know, I don't understand what this is actually meaning. Every single part that's in you has to make you. Oh, no, I get it now. So people aren't just the one picture. The whole picture basically has to mean your whole entire personality going together to make you.
Oh, thank you. That's really cool.
No, you have to do this because boys have to do this. Only boys can go in this specific club. Let's drive this certain amount of Pokemon cards to be in this club. And that's basically what it goes like.
Okay, so we heard it from the perspective of a young person. So now we're gonna try and hear it from the person who coined intersectionality. We're gonna hear it from Kimberly Crenshaw and her conversation. So based on what's happening, this was filmed years ago, but there are some things that might trigger some emotions in you. If it does, please reach out. Privately, you could reach out to Sybil, but also I won't do the entire video so that we could get from her explanation what intersectionality is and go from there. So we'll start it now. Thank you.
Please stand up. Okay, so I'm gonna name some names. When you hear a name that you don't recognize, you can't tell me anything about them, I'd like you to take a seat and stay seated. The last person standing, we're gonna see what they know, okay? All right. Eric Garner. Mike Brown. Tamir Rice. Freddie Gray. So those of you who are still standing, I'd like you to turn around and take a look. I'd say half to most of the people are still standing. So let's continue. Michelle Cusseau. Tanisha Anderson. Ara Russer. Megan Hockaday. So if we look around again, there are about 4 people still standing. And actually, I'm not going to put you on the spot. I just say that to encourage transparency, so you could be seated. So those of you who recognize the first group of names know that these were African Americans who've been killed by the police over the last 2.5 years. What you may not know is that the other list is also African Americans who have been killed within the last 2 years. Only one thing distinguishes the names that you know from the names that you don't know: gender. So let me first let you know that there's nothing at all distinct about this audience that explains the pattern of recognition that we've just seen. I've done this exercise dozens of times around the country. I've done it to women's rights organizations. I've done it with civil rights groups. I've done it with professors. I've done it with students. I've done it with psychologists. I've done it with sociologists. I've done it even with progressive members of Congress. And everywhere, the awareness of the level of police violence that Black women experience is exceedingly low. Now, it is surprising, isn't it, that this would be the case? I mean, there are two issues involved here. There's police violence against African Americans, and there's violence against women, two issues that have been talked about a lot lately. But when we think about who is implicated by these problems, when we think about who's victimized by these problems, the names of these Black women never come to mind. Now, communications experts tell us that when facts do not fit with the available frames, people have a difficult time incorporating new facts into their way of thinking about a problem. These women's names have slipped through our consciousness because there are no frames for us to see them, no frames for us to remember them, no frames for us to hold them. As a consequence, reporters don't lead with them, policymakers don't think about them, and politicians aren't encouraged or demanded that they speak to them. Now, you might ask, well, why does a frame matter? I mean, after all, an issue that affects Black people and an issue that affects women, wouldn't that necessarily include Black people who are women and women who are Black people? Well, the simple answer is that this is a trickle-down approach to social justice, and many times it just doesn't work. Without frames that allow us to see how social problems impact all the members of a targeted group, many will fall through the cracks of our movements, left to suffer in virtual isolation. But it doesn't have to be this way. Many years ago, I began to use the term intersectionality to deal with the fact that many of our social justice problems, like racism and sexism, are often overlapping, creating multiple levels of social injustice. Now, the experience that gave rise to intersectionality was my chance encounter with a woman named Emma DeGraffenreid. Emma DeGraffenreid was an African-American woman, a working wife, and a mother. I actually read about Emma's story from the pages of a legal opinion written by a judge who had dismissed Emma's claim of race and gender discrimination against a local car manufacturing plant. Emma, like so many African-American women, sought better employment for her family and for others. She wanted to create a better life for her children and for her family. But she applied for a job and she was not hired, and she believed that she was not hired because she was a Black woman. Now, the judge in question dismissed Emma's suit. And the argument for dismissing the suit was that the employer did hire African Americans and the employer hired women. The real problem, though, that the judge was not willing to acknowledge was what Emma was actually trying to say. That the African Americans that were hired, usually for industrial jobs, maintenance jobs, were all men. And the women that were hired, usually for secretarial or front office work, were all white. Only if the court was able to see how these policies came together would he be able to see the double discrimination that Emma DeGraff and Reed was facing. But the court refused to allow Emma to put two causes of action together to tell her story because he believed that by allowing her to do that, she would be able to have preferential treatment. She'd have an advantage by being able to have two swings at the bat when African American men and white women only had one swing at the bat. But of course, neither African American men or white women needed to combine a race and gender discrimination claim to tell the story of the discrimination they were experiencing. Why wasn't the real unfairness law's refusal to protect African American women simply because their experiences weren't exactly the same as white women and African American men? Rather than broadening the frame to include African American women, the court simply tossed their case completely out of court. Now, as a student of anti-discrimination law, as a feminist, as an anti-racist, I was struck by this case. It felt to me like injustice squared. So first of all, Black women I come to recognize that the problem that Emma was facing was a framing problem. The frame that the court was using to see gender discrimination or to see race discrimination was partial and it was distorting. For me, the challenge that I faced was trying to figure out whether there was an alternative narrative, a prism that would allow us to see Emma's dilemma, a prism that would allow us to rescue her from the cracks in the law, that would allow judges to see her story. So it occurred to me, maybe a simple analogy to an intersection might allow judges to better see Emma's dilemma. So if we think about this intersection, the roads to the intersection would be the way that the workforce was structured by race and by gender. And then the traffic in those roads would be the hiring policies and the other practices that ran through those roads. Now, because Emma was both Black and female, she was positioned precisely where those roads overlap, experiencing the simultaneous impact of the company's gender and race traffic. The law is like that ambulance that shows up and is ready to treat Emma only if it can be shown that she was harmed on the race road or on the gender road, but not where those roads intersected. Mm-hmm. So what do you call being impacted by multiple forces and then abandoned to fend for yourself? Intersectionality seemed to do it for me. I would go on to learn that African American women, like other women of color, like other socially marginalized people all over the world, were facing all kinds of dilemmas and challenges as a consequence of intersectionality, intersections of race and gender, of heterosexism, transphobia, xenophobia, ableism. All of these social dynamics come together and create challenges that are sometimes quite unique. But in the same way that intersectionality raised our awareness to the way that Black women live their lives, it also exposes the tragic circumstances under which African American women die. Police violence.
So I'm gonna stop the video here, and it's not based on disrespect, but it's based on our time that we have to this morning. And so I'm gonna put up the question that I had. In terms of continuing after you've watched the first video, you've watched the urgency of intersectionality, and you'll have it as a reference um, um, as well. And I know that this video from Kimberly Crenshaw, that it was taken in the US, and this wasn't recently, like I said before, but we have these issues in Canada as well. So when you think about intersectionality and the way that it was described, some of the highlights that I would like to bring about is that intersectionality is impacted by our identity. It's impacted by oppression and privilege. Intersectionality is time and context contingent, and it's not just fixed or ahistorical. Someone's identity shifts over time and place, resulting in social location varies both spatially and temporarily. So when I used to live in the US, I didn't have children. I come to Canada, I now have children. So there's other things that are added to my identity. There are multiple axes of power that can impact me, such as nationality, if I have a Canadian nationality or not, if I'm in limbo with that, religion, able-bodiedness, your race, your class, your gender. So it doesn't matter if you're Black or if you're from another group, your intersectionality is based on who you are. And all these combined effects of racial and gender-based oppression and discussions surrounding intersectionality, they all honestly started as early as 1832. But in 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw really focused on its impact to society and what it does. So one of the questions I would like you to think about and just write it out for you or somewhere is, what is your intersectionality and how does that impact other people? The other concept we were going to talk about is being an ally. When you would like to be supporting people and addressing cultural competency or oppression, is we also need to understand what it means to be an ally. And there's a lot of discussions that no one can claim they are an ally, but honestly, we can dismantle this by identifying what would work and what wouldn't work for people. So being an ally really means acknowledging that just like cultural competency, it is a lifelong process. It's personal, the work that you do with individuals and communities, and trying to really focus on humility when addressing issues in the community and when connecting with people. So it is a practice that we all should be engaging in because it is needed. Allyship, according to Anne Bishop, is something that could be used in a variety of ways. One of the things that I really would like us to think about is the goal of just talking about all of this is to have inclusion in mind, because a lot of communities go through exclusion, integration, segregation, but the goal is really inclusion. That's our ultimate goal that we have in mind. People need to belong. Could you just give me a second? sorry. It's part of my intersectionality. And my daughter needs to go to university, so she's getting herself organized. I apologize for the loud background and the noises, but she's leaving the home in 5 minutes. And just so you know, because of COVID, I have been working in my home since March. And so this is part of who I am, and I apologize for the loud noises. So just to go back to our presentation, it just shows I'm human. Uh, just to go back, the focus is really on getting to inclusion where we have everybody feeling that they belong. When you think about your own organization, do you think that you're at the level of inclusion, integration, exclusion, segregation, or separation, or you're not sure? Just think about it. Take a screenshot of this and think about how all of this impacts you as an individual. We spoke about trauma last week, and that trauma is different for anybody, for everybody. So as we continue to support families and communities, we need to consider that trauma and other experiences do impact their access to resources. And one additional barrier that they might be facing is the trauma through racism, through oppression, through inability to access resources. As I said before, I like quotes. This one here from Robert Kennedy: few will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events. It is from numberless, diverse acts of courage and relief that human history is shaped. Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sent forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy, and daring those ripples built a current which can sweep down the mightiest of oppression and resistance. So I put this up because talking about cultural competency, talking about oppression and racism is not an easy task. We would like for all of us to be on the road of cultural competency and looking at the meaning of it. So cultural competency is defined as congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together in a system. We started out with it last week. On a more practice-based level, cultural competency is the ability of individuals to respond. Systems and individuals need to be able to respond respectfully, effectively to people of all cultures, backgrounds, races, ethnic backgrounds, and religions in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values the cultural differences of individuals. On an individual level, we looked at it the last week as well, where it is about developing cultural competence, and it requires one's own cultural assumptions, your values and beliefs, looking at it. But on an organizational level, it's really looking at systems and the policies and processes that ensure that people remain in a crippled position, and they're not able to successfully integrate, they're not able to successfully be included in every aspect of society. There are a number of benefits for cultural competency. It provides, it helps service providers and organizations to help have a particular way of doing things. It is a continuous process. And here they use the word cultural sensitivity. I would go so much further than sensitivity. but really helping people to understand where to go. It really takes empathy, dignity, respect to create an environment where everybody feels like they're included in everything. So like I said before, the focus is on going for cultural competency. Now, some people might say, well, where does cultural humility fits in? That was a question that was asked last week. Cultural humility involves an ongoing process of self-exploration, self-critique, combined with a willingness to learn from others. It means entering a relationship with someone else, with a community, with the intention of honoring their beliefs, their customs, and their values. It means acknowledging differences and accepting that a person that you're working with, a community you're working with, accepting them for who they are. So cultural humility has to do with these 4 points and so much more. If this was like a 3-hour face-to-face, we would be able to really get to a really rich conversation about this. So for today, one of the things I want you to keep in mind, we want to go through liberation, getting all the barriers that we're talking about, racism as a determinant of health, as well as some of the other things that people go through. We would like to dismantle them, take them away. So we are focusing on anti-oppressive practice and cultural competency. Now, if there is one thing I would like you to walk away with, is that cultural competency happens in different domains. And the competencies that I really would like you to think about is about your attitudes and beliefs, the knowledge you need to build, and skills. But when you're doing it, think about it about your own awareness of your own cultural values and biases. Think about it of your awareness of the client's worldview, and think about it about the interventions that you would like to use. So this visual, if there's nothing else you remember of today, this is the visual that I really would like you to have all the time. The competencies you need to build are in these areas, and the domains are the ones that show you your road to cultural competency. So if you think about it, then that's where the intersectionality of other people is important. So this quote, to truly know others, you must first know yourself. You need to know your attitudes. You need to know your beliefs. You need to have knowledge, and you need to have skills. The attitudes and beliefs is your awareness of your own cultural values and biases. If you don't know who you are and you don't know your own biases, it will be difficult to understand when other people are being oppressed because of their language, because of their skin color, because of their preference in so many areas in their lives. It will be difficult to understand it. So with your attitudes and beliefs, we all know ourselves. But there are different areas that are considered very important by an author, Collins and Arthur in 2007. Your own assumptions, your values, your biases, your stereotypes, and everybody has them. No one can claim they don't have any of this. The impact of culture on your practice, your own cultural belief, and then also thinking about your own cultural competence. So you need to focus on, I say you, but I mean we, because I'm included in this, active awareness of personal assumption, active awareness of personal values and biases, and how these may impact what you do. Your knowledge, looking at What do I know? How does my personal worldviews, how is it shaped? And then how it's shaped in terms of my personal identity, my cultural identity, and the context which I function in. The context such as the social norms, the environment, your historical context, but also looking at how has my family shaped me? How did my genetics shape me? My own personality, my sexual orientation, social class, heritage, ethnicity, gender, and ability. How do all of these come together and help me to build the knowledge to understand my own personal worldview? Then your skills. In terms of your skills, it is important in this context to be cognizant of your own experiences with sexism or racism or discrimination or stereotypes and prejudice, because all of this will help you to want to have different skill sets to helping people. So that was the first domain. And when you look at some strategies that could help you, it's finding opportunities to interact with individuals from diverse cultural backgrounds, such as this forum or at work or in your community. Enrolling into webinars and courses specifically focused on Indigenous people, on gender studies, and other issues that really you would like to go with. Access to cultural specific or international films or fairs or art shows or music and games that can be incorporated as part of your home, as part of what you're doing. When there are different clients or communities to work with, select communities that will push you so much further to get to know Canadian society, to get to know other people as much, and try to stay current on issues and policies and legislations that may impact immigrants, refugees, ethnocultural and racialized people, but also Indigenous people and sexually diverse populations as well. You continue to build your awareness, you build your own understanding, your cultural values with these opportunities. Again, it's about going towards liberation, hope, cultural competence, anti-oppressive practice. I embedded them all in between. And then the second domain is the professional awareness of the client's worldview. And the quote that I would like to embed here is, if you can do nothing else at all, do whatever is in your power to make the people in your life feel completely unashamed of who they are. And so with this one, your awareness of the client's worldview, the competencies that you need to build is, again, your attitudes and beliefs, your knowledge, and your skills. With the attitudes and belief, awareness of negative and positive emotional reaction that you might have when you encounter Indigenous people, when you encounter people from immigrant or refugee or racialized background or sexual diverse population. Think about the awareness of your practices that could be perceived as discriminatory. Also, your awareness in terms of ageism, and someone has identified their youthfulness at work in the chat box. Consider patients' experiences and understanding of their diagnosis and treatment if you are in healthcare. If you're not in healthcare, think about other ways the community might be impacted in the way your attitudes and your beliefs impact them. Last week in Canada, we had something really horrendous happen in a hospital, in one of our hospitals. And we can't say, well, if it was me, I wouldn't do it. All of those things happen because of the awareness that someone has about themselves, the awareness they have about other people, and the cultural competence skills they might not have to do their work. When it comes to knowledge in this particular domain, knowledge of other cultures, specifically around practices that impact health and well-being, that impact racism, knowledge of social and political influence that impact indigenous people, sexually diverse population, and IRER, knowledge of race and culture and ethnicity that can impact psychological disorders and help seeking behaviors. If someone isn't coming to you, it could be from a variety of reasons, but unless we're aware of what it could be and bring that as part of the conversation, we won't know what it is. And then your skills. Advocating for ongoing cultural competency training, such as Sybil is doing, incorporate the community's experiences with the social determinants of health, specifically around race and racism, seek out training, and look at conversations that you could have with people that are mentoring you or people that you're mentoring yourself. Again, it's about going somewhere. It's about the journey we're having to getting to cultural competency and anti-oppressive practice. And then finally, intervention and strategies. And these interventions and strategies, the competencies we built around it, needs to be around our attitudes and beliefs again, our knowledge and our skills. And the quote that I thought was fitting is that an individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. So when we're focusing on self, there's nothing wrong with it because self-care is important. Just now, I really had to mute myself, close my screen to talk to my daughter because she's leaving. I need to focus on her. But we have the ability based on the privileges we have to live in Canada, based on the privilege of having a position. There are so many people who have lost their jobs through COVID. But because of all these things, we have the privilege to continue advocating on behalf of humanity. Assessments, interventions, recommendations, culture-specific needs is really important to pay attention to be able to look at how do we support others. With the knowledge, it is about getting to know the particular needs of people, looking at statistics and what's happening with indigenous people, with sexually diverse people, and with people who are going through the barriers and inequality and equity issues in terms of being from a different background or being an immigrant or racialized in this country. Some of the skills that we need is having conversation with the community, having conversations with individuals, asking questions, how they're doing, what their perceptions are, embedding issues of who are the individuals in their communities who might help them, such as religious leaders, spiritual leaders. How does spirituality fits with the journey that people are walking on, even if it doesn't have anything to do with health or healthcare, and adjusting the way we look at individuals and adjusting the way we look at how do we practice. Years ago, a student of mine highlighted for me her epiphany in terms of how she should practice. She said, it's almost, Linda, like putting a prism and then continuing to adjust the lens until I can see through it. And I thought that's remarkable because I wear glasses. If my glasses are dirty or if 2 years has passed and I haven't checked my eyes, I have blurred vision. So that's the same way we need to start looking at the way we practice with individuals who are different different from us. And for me, it would mean maybe it would mean practicing with people from sexual diverse backgrounds, from indigenous background, from IRER background. That's what it would mean for me. So unless I can take my glasses off and start cleaning it, because right now, as I took it off, everything is fussy for me. I need to put them on to be able to see. Well, what helps me see in terms of providing services is looking at the domains that I have addressed before and the skills and the knowledge and my attitudes and beliefs that I need to adjust and address and eliminate to be able to provide services that doesn't situate around stereotypes, biases, prejudices, discrimination, racism, but where I can take my intersectionality and bring it into the encounter. How are you doing? Okay. So there's 2 case studies that I brought, but I also want to be sensitive in terms of time and look at maybe if there are questions, Sybil, to address them right now. If there are no questions, then we'll continue. Sorry.
Yeah, let's start with the case study, Linda, and then we can go on.
Thank you. I take my cues from Sybil. She knows the group better. So there's this case study on the screen. I would like you to read it. And there are 2 questions. If you want to use your chat box to address it, that's great. If you want to unmute yourself and talk, that's awesome as well. And so I would like to say thank you for the individual who shared her experiences with me. I changed some things just to ensure that it wasn't too obvious who it was. What are your thoughts after reading this? How would your team address this? And what I'll do is, and if people have had the opportunity to read this, think about our conversations about equity. Think about our conversations about the domains of cultural competency. I'll put this slide up. What are your thoughts? It's too bad I can't share the 2 things at the same time, the case study and this visual. So think about this. Now we're going to go back to the case study. What are your thoughts?
Looks like there's no thoughts right now, Linda, but there's a few Q&As. How would you want to proceed?
So there's one thought, and someone says that it's small, okay, so I could read it out, but someone did say something.
Yes, you're right. So I can read it out too. I'm part of the diversity working group at my workplace. I'm pretty direct when addressing cultural incompetencies, but it doesn't get received well most of the time.
Mm-hmm. And there was one above.
Okay, so let me read this next one too, and then you can maybe address both of them together. So this is directly to the case study. It says, perhaps she was not Caucasian. People of different races are more familiar with their regional languages. So I'm not sure how relevant that would be, but the team should include her. So that, I guess it was not complete. So those were two sort of comments from two different people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there was one above.
Okay,
two above.
I'll just pull it up then. I understand the ideas of referring clients out for care that is culturally competent. However, sometimes some practitioners are quick to refer out when they do not share the same cultural background as the client.
Okay.
Is that what you're referring to, Linda?
No, but that's okay. We'll get to it. Thank you,
Okay.
people. So there are two things. So when addressing cultural competency or anti-racism, anti-oppression in your organization, one of the things that I always tell people, ensure that you're safe. If you're not safe, meaning not physical safety, but also emotional safety and safety regarding your position. So that's the one thing. When you address it and it's not taken into stride, don't think that was wasted energy. You did what you needed to do. And so individuals and organizations will do whatever feels comfortable with them to adhere to the status quo. So one, don't feel discouraged. You did what you needed to do. In terms of addressing what you perceive, you're advocating on behalf of other people. You're putting yourself in a position where you can address these things. So that's one. That's in terms of the addressing cultural incompetence. The other issue in terms of she was probably not Caucasian or however it worked. One of the things that we need to understand as a group of people is that we need to support other people when they're going through issues of oppression, because today's, as I said before, today might be someone's experiences with oppression, tomorrow it could be yours. So if we're not positioning ourselves to address it as a whole, it could become really difficult then to continue to address it in the organization if we're separated. And I know that many of us struggle, many organizations struggle right now with funding issues. And funding is, if you can get the funding, great. But I will never forget the impact that this may have on an individual where they have to go it alone, especially when it is about their names. Because there are many individuals in Canada who are changing their names because each time their name is seen, perceived, they experience issues of oppression, either not getting a position or not being placed in a position that they should be having, or their children being mocked, or all kinds of issues. And oppression is hurtful, not just that, but oppression really impacts someone's well-being. It is, I think, 2 weeks, no, maybe a month now in Chestermere, that a young girl, I think she was 15, that she committed suicide because of oppression. So if it is about someone's name, rally behind them, talk to the executive director, and ensure that people get the support they need. Okay.
Thanks, Linda. I just wanted to, I guess you were referring to the Q&A, and it's from Steve Clay. My initial thought was it was an oversight. After reviewing the background slide, I think it would be worth asking Maymar what her thoughts are in a sidebar conversation.
Very good. So starting with that helps the individual to really feel acknowledged, feel like, because this is then the next slide is how could you support Maimuna in a cultural competent anti-oppressive manner, is really having those conversations, understanding where she's coming from, understanding what it did to them and how they can continue in the organization, right? But also thinking about service policymakers and researchers when we're working with individuals from diverse background. Anything else, Sybil, that we need to address in Q&A?
There are no other questions. Just another comment that they really appreciate the time for self-reflection and the videos. So a couple of comments around that. If there are no more questions at 11:23, I'm just going to share my video. So thank you, Linda, for your thought-provoking and inspiring presentation. It is our hope that many of the service providers present here today will become allies and accomplices and advocates for change in how services are delivered. We have limited resources, but if we use the resources well and implement the strategies, the interventions, and the tools you have shared with us today, we can serve racialized groups with equal and equitable care. We'll keep the dialogue open and alive and create a pathway together. So thank you, Linda. I'm sure we'll have many more questions. People are very interested in viewing the webinar, which will be recorded and I'll be on our website. If there is no other question, I really want to thank Linda. Also want to thank all our participants for joining us today. Please reach out to SPCO if you are interested in making meaningful change in how services are delivered. And we do have a committee which is called Access and Equity Committee. If you're interested, please come send me an email and we can start you up with being advocates for change. Again, I want to thank our funders, Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, Ontario Trillium Foundation, and New Horizons for Seniors program. Please join us for the next webinar, which will be held on Tuesday, the 13th at 10. Once again, thank you everybody for coming out together and have a great afternoon. Take care. Thanks, Linda.
No worries. So well, I'll keep this slide up because it talks about the practical applications. And so I'll keep it up until the last person has signed off.
Okay. So getting a lot of thank yous, so that's good. We're getting a lot of comments there, Linda.
Just gonna go to the Q&A as well. That's just for here. So someone asked about
oh yes, the
examples. And this is the thing, you can just continue because now we were getting into the specific knowledge and techniques.
It's almost like we need to have you back again.
Yeah.
There were a couple of questions that I didn't see, but they were out there.
Mm-hmm. So someone is asking if I do private consulting. This is private consulting. So this has nothing to do with my day-to-day work. In fact, this is my vacation hour that I took to do this as a private consulting. So if you would like to connect with me, you could do it through Sybil. So someone asked a question, how do you keep a positive attitude despite facing oppression from every angle every day? It's a good question, and I'll just give you an analogy for it. If you think about a tree, and I'm not quite sure if this person is still online, but if you think about a tree, when a tree is planted and you look at the tree and the roots are completely so in the ground, and then the trunk is out and the branches are everywhere. You honestly, even if the tree is hollow from the inside, you will never know that the tree is hollow from the inside because of how the tree takes its position. And to address and to keep a positive attitude despite facing oppression, you can't do it on your own. The tree takes its nutrients from the ground. From the tree also takes nutrients when people come and they might prune the tree. The tree. Remember the quote I provided, you don't fix the person, you fix the environment. So if you are facing constant oppression from every angle every day, you need people around you who could help you. And although um, I like people, I have people around me all the time. From time to time, when Sybil was living here, we would talk. But as a professional, I have mentors. So people who are professionally linked to me, but then there are also other people who I go to, who I reach out to. Especially now with COVID-19, you can't isolate yourself. So if you are are experiencing oppression from every angle every day, you need people around you who you can talk to, but also who you trust and you can share those things with. And a positive attitude is very important. But it just takes having 2 to 3 people around you can talk to. I'm hoping that addressed the question in the Q&A box.
One of the things we also do is take some of the questions later on and then put the answers on the webinar, Linda, so we can have that available. There are some other comments that came through that were not addressed, so we'll definitely send that to you so that you could maybe answer them and have it on our webinar, on our website.
Mm-hmm. I'll just also add my email.
Yes, please do.
Checkbox. Okay. Someone's asking how difficult it was to organize such relevant topics. It honestly, I started doing this work in 1998. Started in immigrant serving agencies and then going, but it's something I'm passionate about. This isn't what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis in my job, but I'm really passionate about it, and every opportunity I get to be able to do this work, I do. So yeah. So one last question, how do you begin to address such issues with government organizations? It is really being involved in writing proposals, being involved. Get a seat at the table. One of the things I tell people is it doesn't matter how broken of a chair you get, how broken the seat is that you get, make sure you get a seat. Because when you're not at the table, you cannot talk, you can't address the issues. So make sure you're able to be at the table and talk. That's what I would say. So that's where it begins. And then when you are at the table, you are very strategic. The way you address the issues is based on facts, based on statistics. based on issues that you see that are going on, not anecdotal, because people won't listen. If you can't really show what's happening, people won't listen to you. You need to show the facts. So what you're bringing to the table needs to be impacting you, needs to be impacting communities, and you need to show it. When you can show it, people will listen. And even if they're not showing you at that particular moment that they're listening, they are listening. And so you continue and be strategic, I sometimes, depending on where I'm at, sometimes I take the emotions out of what I would like to say. Because when, if people start seeing my emotions before they hear my voice, that could also turn them off. So I'm strategic in terms of what I do. Yep, I agree with you that allies are at the table through relationships. That's why we need to have mentors and relationships in different places so that we can get a seat at the table. Very good comment. Thank you.
Mhm.
So with that, I would like to say thank you for having me, and we'll connect later. Sybil, you can call me later.
Sure. Thank you again, Linda.
Bye,
Appreciate your
everybody,
time
and
and
thanks for
energy, and
everything.
hopefully we can do it again.
And so, Sybil, if you could do a screenshot of the comments
Yes.
and the
Uh,
questions, that would be great.
Yeah, I think Mylin will be doing that, and we'll send it off to you for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Have a great afternoon.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.